One of the characters in The Boys Season 1 that got far more screen time than I actually anticipated was the Deep. The character in the show, while, pretty reprehensible in his actions, I felt had one of the strongest character arcs in the first season. Except for the scene with the gills. That was gross and I didn't like that scene. Now, normally I would say something like, additionally, this video isn't going to cover everything that the Deep ever does in the comics, blah blah blah, but it kind of is, because he doesn't really do a whole lot in the comics. But this will cover everything that he's involved in, for the most part. However, before we begin, we are giving away a few copies of The Boys Volume 1, and it's pretty simple to win. First, subscribe, second, like the video, and third, leave a comment below telling us which member of The Boys is your favorite and why, or really anything Boys related will do. Now, let's take a look at the minuscule amount of information we know about the Deep. The reason I was kinda shocked at how much screen time the Deep got was because in the comic books, he's a fairly insignificant character. The Deep barely does anything of consequence in the books, and I don't want you to feel like you were deceptively clickbaited into watching this, so before I go any farther, I do want to mention that almost nothing is really known about the Deep's origins or abilities in the comics. He never gets into a fight or has any real meaningful impact in any way. The Deep's first appearance is The Boys issue 3, and for the majority of the series, he functions almost like an accountant or a businessman. All we really know about where the Deep came from is the fact that, like the other members of the Seven, he was created in a lab after taking a small child and injecting them with a tremendous amount of Compound V. He was raised by the Vought American Company to be a PR spokesperson for heroes, but oftentimes he takes a backseat to the Big Three, aka Homelander, Queen Maeve, and Black Noir. As far as abilities, we know that he is incredibly strong and durable, and that he can fly, but for his abilities in the show, like the classic Aquaman-like ability to communicate with marine life, this just is never really shown in the comic books, so we have no idea if he actually has that ability. Keep in mind that most of the Seven's powers, backstory, and feats have been dramatically embellished by Vought in order to make them appear even more powerful than they really are. The Deep's theme as a hero centers around being a nautical hero, but we have absolutely no idea if he has actual nautical abilities. The Deep in the comics is a drastically different character than in the show in both appearance and impact, and first off, let's kind of focus on what everybody else in our society seems to be really hung up on, and that is his appearance. You'll notice that in Amazon's The Boys, the Deep is a 6-foot-tall, handsome white man wearing a wetsuit that loosely resembles Atlantean body armor that somebody like Aquaman or Mera would wear. In the comics, though, the Deep is a roughly 7-foot-tall black man wearing a suit of old-timey nautical diving equipment. The difference between these two characters, pretty massive if you ask me. I think it's worth mentioning that the Deep from the comics is probably a far more menacing looking character than the Deep from the show, and the reason being is that Chance Crawford's version of the Deep is designed to look like DC's Aquaman, who's widely considered by most people who don't read comics to be a bit of a joke. However, anybody who's ever read a modern Aquaman comic knows that the King of the Seven Seas is a grade A boss and he's not to be mermaid fun of, except when you land a sick Aquaman joke like I just landed. I'm pretty funny. The only times the Deep is shown in the comics going on real missions, they were fairly catastrophic failures or fairly uneventful things. During the Boys' original war on the Seven, the Deep is used as muscle to keep the other Boys members away from the Butcher and Homelander as they have a private conversation. However, when the Deep rises from the waters of the Hudson River, it's so ridiculous looking that the Boys kind of just make fun of him unmercilessly. Similarly, when a ceasefire is ordered between the Boys, the CIA, Vought, and the Seven, the Deep is on site for that confrontation as well, and we're led to believe that the Seven kill an entire platoon of soldiers and paint the airplane hangar with their blood to symbolize what would happen if the war between the two groups continues. But it turns out that Homelander actually killed all of them by himself, with the rest of the Seven just standing there looking like dopes. As we have discussed in far greater detail in the Homelander video, the Deep was part of the Seven's attempt to, help during 9/11, and he's shown flying and holding onto Black Noir and Marathon, two members of the Seven that can't fly. And Homelander tries to bark orders to the team, but since they're too far spread apart and sound doesn't echo well in the emptiness of the sky, the other Seven members can't hear him, and the Deep ends up getting crushed by the front of an airplane that they're attempting to save. Then the Deep tries to smash his way into the cockpit, and the subsequent slipstream sends him flying off the plane. The rest of the time you see the Deep in the comics, he's literally complaining about being in the background, and as I mentioned before, he's oftentimes shown complaining about some aspect of business or heroism, such as his cut of profits and proceeds. However, one positive aspect of the Deep is that he doesn't actually demonstrate any of the debauchery or hedonistic tendencies that the rest of the Seven demonstrate. For all accounts and purposes, the Deep in the comics is the least scummy of the group. He's just really about his brand and making money, and that's about it. Personally speaking, I think the Deep in the show is a much more interesting character, and frankly, I wish there would have been more comic book events with the Deep in it to help understand his character and build off of, but again, that's why you don't always take the source material into account when you're creating something new like a television show. These characters are obviously two very different things that serve two very different purposes, and because of that, I'm trying to not associate them together as much. And that is about it for the Deep. Thank you guys for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you learned a lot, please remember to share and subscribe and all that other YouTube crap. This has been Nick with Key Issues, and you know the motto, the boys over everything.